Welcome in to the PFF podcast. Steve Palazzolo here with you. And I'm all by myself today because we have a very special episode. We're going to give you guys a sneak peek at the PFF fantasy team and what they have to offer. I know it's basically fantasy season, and drafts are going on. Your draft's going on this week, next week, sometime. I have one in late August coming up, and there is no better place than PFF Fantasy to prepare for your fantasy league. So today's show, no Mike Renner, no Sam Monson. Sam just made it over to the States. Again, be sure to check him out at PFF_Sam. Welcome him to America because he just got over here from Ireland. Had some mishaps with the airlines, but he's here, and I'm going to go move him in shortly. We're going to go move some furniture at Sam's house, but go give him a nice welcome on Twitter at PFF_Sam. But those guys aren't here. I'm going to interview PFF Director of Fantasy Football, Jeff Ratcliffe, and then another PFF Fantasy Analyst, Scott Barrett. Those guys just do fantastic work, and we're going to give you guys insight for your fantasy league, for DFS, give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek at what those guys are doing on the fantasy side and with the fantasy podcast, which I suggest you guys also download and subscribe to, and give you guys a little insight as to what comes out of our PFF products, Edge and Elite. So really fun episode here, and a way for us to talk football and fantasy. You know, there's the football breakdown of things, and then there's the fantasy angle to it. We could talk about offensive lines. Those guys can kind of put some numbers and say, well, because of what you guys are saying on the football side, how good's this offensive line? We could say, here's what the opportunity is going to be. Here's where this guy should be valued. So I think there's a nice mix between, some hardcore football analysis and then fantasy analysis, which is essentially knowing the market and knowing when to take players. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Before we get into it, though, I need to tell you about my new favorite way to play fantasy football. And it's a new sponsor on the show. It's called Draft in your App Store. So go to the App Store and search Draft. You can also go to playdraft.com, and it is a cool it's a best ball game. So what happens is you're going to draft a team on the app or at playdraft.com. You're going to draft a team, 18 players if you're playing the NFL game, and they have games for MLB and golf and NBA. You can play anytime. You draft your 18-person team, and then that's it. Once you draft, you don't have to worry about a waiver wire. You don't have to make trades. You don't even have to set your lineup each week. They will automatically take your best players every single week. One QB, few running backs, few receivers, a tight end. So your best players will always get the proper credit. Don't worry about injuries, anything. You can draft a team anytime you want. Leagues start up every couple minutes. I've been drafting multiple teams. You just go in there. You can do a fast draft, which I love. You do that in under an hour. You just crank right through it. You can do the slow draft. If you want to take 8 hours per pick on the clock, you can kind of go through it in a week or two, however long it takes. So plenty of options, and the best part about it is you can win real money. They have $3 games, $10 games, $20 games, and we have an opportunity for you to start a free $3 game. All you have to do is use the promo code PFF on your first deposit. So you go in there, you deposit money, promo code's PFF, you will get a free $3 game, and you just go in there, you draft your team, and just forget about it for the rest of the year. I'll probably have at least 5 teams once the season starts, maybe 10, because I'm having a lot of fun with it. Everybody at PFF is having a great time. So remember, it's at playdraft.com, or just use Draft or search Draft in the App Store, and you will get, I think, the coolest new way to play fantasy football. Don't forget your promo code PFF. We're having a ton of fun with it. All right, guys, with that said, I'm going to go and bring in the PFF fantasy experts. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Give us your feedback because we're going to help you guys win your fantasy league this year. Let's check them out. All right, I'm here with Director of PFF Fantasy, Jeff Ratcliffe, returning to the PFF podcast. He had a little appearance on the History of PFF podcast this summer. Be sure to go back and check out that archive as we went through all of our history in all components. But Jeff, welcome to the show, and I'm going to get right into it. We're going to give the fans some awesome tips and sleepers and players, but I need you to break down what is happening on the site at PFF right now, because we're right in the middle of fantasy season, and all I know is things just keep getting updated, getting better. Give me the breakdown. What's happening over at PFF on the fantasy side right now?
Absolutely, Steve. Yeah, I think the biggest complaint that a lot of people always had was, you have all this great stuff, but I can't find it, right? So obviously we redesigned the website. If you stopped by it recently, it's so much easier to use. There's more information, and we actually have player pages. Imagine that. A fantasy site or a football site with player pages, how novel. And on those player pages, one of the new things that we have is our player profiles. People have been asking me about the Fantasy Draft Guide magazine that we put out last year. We'll still have all that content. We're not putting it in magazine form. It's going to be on the site. You get that with Edge. You get all the tools with PFF Edge. You get player grades with PFF Edge. And you, of course, get all this great content. Steve, it's unbelievable that we have draft content already. We have basically everything you need to know for the 2018 NFL draft. And that, 3-in-1 there. And of course, if you want to step the game up a little bit, you want to add some DFS, you want to add our player position pivot tool, which essentially you'll be able to find out where everybody is playing constantly. You want to see how many snaps J.J. Watt is playing at defensive end, or where he's lining up, if he's at Leo or wherever. You can see all of that in that tool, and a few other goodies there as well with the PFF Elite. So if you want to step your game up there, that's a good way to do it. But Edge is awesome. Elite is even better. That's all I got to say.
I love it. Yeah, that's again something we talked about this summer, and we've been trying to hype it up, but just, really given the specifics of what people are getting, we sat down and we said, we don't want people to just get their fantasy stuff, just get draft stuff, just get their player grades. You're a football fan, you're going to get all of it, so we rolled it all into one. That's Edge and Elite. So good job summing that up. I want to give away your secrets. Not all of them, but just some of them. I know you've got, you're hosting the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I do suggest everybody that does play fantasy should be subscribed to that. Just search PFF Fantasy on your favorite podcast provider, because those guys are doing a great job over there. But give us, a few tips here and there. Running backs, receivers, tight ends. We'll go position by position. Give me a couple running backs, either positive or negative, but guys that have just caught your eye when you've been doing your research this summer. Guys that you're either higher on than most, lower on than most. Give us some guys that you're going to be watching this season.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at the running back position, it's super chalk right off the bat. You're going to see David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell go 1 or 2 in basically every draft, and depending on whether or not he's suspended, if he isn't, Elliott goes 3, possibly 4 with Antonio Brown. But I think if you're in the back end of that first round, a guy who I'm seriously looking at is Melvin Gordon, because of Anthony Lynn coming over. We know that run game was so successful in Buffalo. Does that translate over there for Gordon? And he doesn't really have any competition for touches in that backfield. So, you can still get elite level production potentially even in the back end of the first round. Going a little bit deeper, you said guys who I might be a little bit lower than consensus. Leonard Fournette. I think a lot of people are really excited about this rookie, but he's going as the 10th running back off the board right now. That feels too early for me. Yes. Do they want to run the football? Doug Marrone says that they're going to run the football. Okay, that's good, but you have to play with the lead a little bit to do that, and they were a team who did not play with the lead very much last year, so they had to abandon the run pretty quickly. So there's a little bit of concern. Of course, Brandon Albert retiring doesn't necessarily help the cause either. So I'm a little bit lower on Fournette than maybe the crowd. If you want to look even deeper than that, here's one guy who I think is going too early, and one guy who I think is going perfect for value, but probably a little too late. Adrian Peterson going too early. Fantasy drafters are taking him in the 4th round. Wow. Do we forget that Mark Ingram's still there? Mark Ingram catching balls. You don't think
Peterson's going to be like 2012 Peterson, just rejuvenated over there?
What are they going to do with Ingram then? That's my biggest question. What are you going to do with Ingram? You're not going to give him the ball too? The guy averaged over 5 yards a carry last year, scored 10 times combined as a runner and receiver. it's just hard for me to see enough meat on the bone for Peterson to be anything better than an RB3 option at this point. He's being drafted as an RB2. The other guy, the guy who I think is going a little bit lower than he should go, is Eddie Lacy. And I know that's not a sexy name for a lot of people. In fact, you put his sticker up on the board on draft day, and you're not going to get oohs and ahs. You may get some laughter, in fact. But he's going in the 6th round. He's a superior running back to Thomas Rawls. And for as much maligned as that offensive line was last year, they did actually create space for their running backs. They weren't terrible from a yards before contact per attempt standpoint. Lacey's in a good position there, and that was a team. Now, they threw the ball a lot more last year than they had in recent seasons, but they had historically under Pete Carroll been more run heavy. So I don't mind taking him, and that shows you can wait a little bit at running back. It falls off pretty quickly there, but to get a guy like him in the 5th or 6th round isn't a bad deal at all.
I'll give you my quick take on all those guys. Melvin Gordon, huge in helping me win my quote-unquote experts dynasty league last year. I went all in on year 1 in dynasty. I know that's not what you're supposed to do, but got to win year 1. Melvin Gordon was a guy, one of our running back scouts, I'll call him, Matt Klassen, former running back in college. He put Melvin Gordon right up there with Todd Gurley coming out of the draft. I trusted his evaluations. Our grades were similar coming out of college. Gordon cut down on the fumbles last year, did a nice job production-wise. When you're talking about Leonard Fournette, we've been talking about maybe it's not the best fit schematically with Jacksonville. They want to run this zone-heavy scheme. That's not really Fournette's game. So I think we're kind of with you right there. The Peterson thing's interesting because you're right, splitting time with Mark Ingram, and he's to live up to that hype, he's got to recapture that magic from a few years ago. You don't always see that in the older running backs. So, I think, I like that analysis, Jeff. You're right on there. Give me some receivers, either way. Either you're higher, you're lower. Who are the receivers that you're really keeping an eye on right now during draft season?
Yeah, and just like at the running back position, so you have the big 3 at running back. I think you have the big 5 at wide receiver. So it's Brown, Jones, Beckham, Evans, and Green. They're all going to go in the 1st round, and they should go probably in that order. It mixes around a little bit, but they'll be likely off the board, by pick 10, all those guys. So you have to look a little bit deeper here, and I think, you have a couple bounce-back candidates in DeAndre Hopkins and Allen Robinson. You're going to get them much cheaper than both of them are first-round picks last year in fantasy drafts. Hopkins going in the 3rd now, Robinson in the 4th. I like the positive regression. Now, I don't think either one of them recaptures 2015, but if they split the difference between 2015 and 2016, you likely will end up getting value with both of those guys. I think the fantasy drafting community has lost their minds with Terrell Pryor right now. He's being drafted as the 14th wide receiver off the board. And while I agree there are plenty of targets to be had with Deshaun Jackson gone and Pierre Garçon gone, the floor is the concern here. The ceiling's super high with Pryor. We know that. But the floor, what is the floor with Terrell Pryor in this offense? How many targets does he see? If Jordan Reed is in fact healthy, and hopefully this toe thing isn't going to spill too far into the preseason here, Jamison Crowder, they're going to get targets as well. Chris Thompson out of the backfield. So the question is how much meat is on the bone, and I'm much more comfortable with Pryor, say, as the 20th, 21st, 22nd wide receiver off the board, not the 14th receiver off the board. I also have to say, Devontae Adams, I think people are looking too much at the touchdown production last year and not enough at the play last year. He's going as the 21st wide receiver off the board, too early for my taste. I think he's more of a wide receiver 3, so outside of the top 24. I think we'll see some regression with touchdown production there. A couple guys on the positive side of things. I'm excited to see what happens with Tyreek Hill. He's in a great has a great opportunity to see more volume now. The upside of that offense is limited by Alex Smith. He's just not an upside quarterback, but in the same right, his dynamic playmaking ability that we saw last year, put the ball in his hands and good things happen. Well, the ball is going to be in his hands more often this year with Jeremy Maclin out of the mix. So definitely like him. And, don't forget about some of these deeper guys. Don't forget about Golden Tate. He's in a good situation. He's being drafted as a wide receiver 3, and he produces there. I think he produces like a wide receiver 2 in Detroit. So I don't mind taking him where he's going. Willie Snead's in a good position to see more targets as well, and he's coming off the board as a wide receiver 3. And then just both the Denver guys are going lower than they probably should. Demaryius Thomas going at 16. I'm among wide receivers, and Emmanuel Sanders going to 34 among wide receivers. Yeah, that's a value. Even if you're not a Trevor Siemian supporter, that's still a really good value. Sanders has done nothing but produce in his time in Denver.
See, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think a lot of times people get caught up in the quality of the quarterback when it comes to these receivers. You mentioned DeAndre Hopkins and Allen Robinson, and it's easy to say, well, the Texans have maybe a rookie at quarterback or Tom Savage at quarterback, and Blake Bortles isn't great, so we can't take Allen Robinson and Trevor Siemian in Denver. But even if they're not the best quarterbacks, they still can give wide receivers plenty of opportunities to collect fantasy points, right? I mean, it's not about even a 20 interception quarterback, even if he's not a great quarterback, can still be feeding these wide receivers the ball. So I kind of like, taking advantage of those types of things. Yeah, this guy's playing with a bad quarterback, but the volume could still be there, and production-wise, it can still be there as well. The Pryor thing is interesting because I've been holding on to this theory that Kirk Cousins has been elevated by his playmakers, and that's why he's looked so good statistically the last couple of years, whether it is Deshaun Jackson, Jordan Reed, Pierre Garçon. Now, I don't know if is Pryor the guy that can come in and continue to elevate him. I wouldn't trust Cousins to just be this guy that's going to elevate a receiver who has those types of question marks. So I think that's fair analysis on Pryor. Tight ends, anybody? And I know strategically, tight end wise, where do you stand as far as you trying to just grab elite guys? You waiting on tight ends? How do you see just the position as a whole, and any names to keep an eye on there?
I think this year you can get away both at the quarterback and tight end position with at least a middle round approach, if not a late round approach. So when I say that, I divide my draft up into thirds. So if it's 16 rounds like a normal draft, then the first 5 rounds is early. Then from 6 to 10 is middle round, and then 11 on is late round, right? So you don't need to draft a tight end until at least the middle rounds and possibly even the late round. Same thing with quarterback. Now, people might be sitting there listening right now saying, well, what about Gronk? And I think that's fine if you want to take Gronk, but he's going in the second round, and he's not a guy who has proven to be quite durable over the course of his career. So you're investing a lot of capital in a guy who has missed some significant time, including last year. I don't think I can do that. Now, if Gronk falls to the third, then yeah, but he's not going to fall to the third, so that's the problem. And you look at guys like Kelsey and Reed. I like Kelsey, but I think he's going a little too early for my taste in the early 4th round. Reed with this injury stuff, I don't like the tight ends in that spot. So I'm looking in the middle rounds. I've seen Kyle Rudolph continually fall to the 9th round. People forget Kyle Rudolph is coming off a career year. He's kind of like a perfect receiver for Sam Bradford. Like it fits so well. And he's 27 years old. This is the time. This is the wheelhouse for tight ends. It's so rare to see rookie tight ends or young tight ends excel. And all of a sudden they hit this point in their career and they take off. We're seeing it with Rudolph. I like taking him where he's going. I don't mind taking Zach Ertz as well, who's going in the 11th round. He was the number 6 fantasy tight end last year. Doesn't score a lot of touchdowns, but still the volume is decent enough there for him in that offense. And I do think Carson Wentz takes a step forward in year 2. Even later, you have guys like Eric Ebron. People are overlooking him because he didn't score a lot of touchdowns. He didn't score, basically almost scored none last year.
And he's still only like 18 years old, right? Everybody's been using you're on either side of the Ebron debate, right? It's either he hasn't lived up to expectations or it's okay, he's so young and, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't give those guys a long enough leash, earlier in their careers. So I don't mind taking Ebron where he's going. You have Jack Doyle as well, who could potentially be in a good situation there in Indy, coming off obviously a breakout year last year, maybe takes another step forward. So there's a lot of value to be had. Coby Fleener. Coby Fleener finished, it depends on your scoring system, but anywhere between 13 and 15 among tight ends last year. So he's, PPR or standard, he was somewhere in that range. He's going as a 21st tight end off the board right now, late 13th round. You get him for nothing, a bologna sandwich at the end of the draft. And he is involved in the red zone. He's an asset there, and there are some more targets to go around, so I don't mind throwing a late-round dart at him or Austin Hooper, who's going in the same range. And with Jacob Tamme out of there, Hooper's now primed to be the top receiving tight end. Now, they spread the ball around a little bit to their tight ends in Atlanta, but he flashed upside last year. a few different points, and that was sort of the three H's tight end class, right? You had Hunter Henry, you had Tyler Higbee, and you had Austin Hooper. And I liked all three of those guys for dynasty purposes, so I think we see Hooper take a step forward this year too.
Yeah, Hooper seems to be a hot name for as a breakout candidate. You mentioned Kyle Rudolph. Hard to believe he's played 6 seasons already. He got drafted in 2011, and I don't know if it was a quiet 83 catches last year, but he had 83 catches last year, by far his career high. So you're absolutely right. A career year for Rudolph, 83 catches, 7 touchdowns last season, and heading into his 7th season in the NFL. And even if he hasn't lived up to, maybe some slightly higher expectations, still extremely productive last season. Great stuff, Jeff. Do appreciate all the insight. I asked you for 1 or 2 players before we got onto the podcast, and you just gave us an entire draft strategy for free. I love it. And if you guys are interested in more of this, check out the PFF Fantasy Podcast. Jeff does a fantastic job, whether it's on the website, on the podcast, or just getting edge and elite. I promise you there's nothing else you need to dominate your fantasy leagues but PFF. So thanks again for joining us, Jeff, and we'll have you on again soon to give our listeners just a little bit of your great fantasy insight.
Always a pleasure, Steve.
Here with senior fantasy analyst Scott Barrett, and we're giving you guys your fantasy fix because it is that time. It's fantasy season. So, Scott, welcome to the show. How's everything going? Getting ready for some football?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are doing some great work on the fantasy side, so definitely want to highlight some of that. And, it's August. We got our drafts coming up, and I know you guys like to hit every angle on the fantasy side. So anything in particular that you're working on from a content standpoint, give me some of the highlights of the stuff that you've been firing out there over the past, basically this whole offseason, over the past couple months.
Yeah, definitely check out my work on a stat I developed called Actual Opportunity. I should be updating and re-releasing that series in a few weeks. Essentially, it's a way of incorporating everyone's favorite stats, things like carries, targets, depth of target, distance from the end zone on each carry and target, and just quantifying it into one whole number. And then that number will indicate which players had the most valuable roles for fantasy last season based on, over a 10-season sample, what we'd expect an average player, given that workload, would produce. And then on top of that, we can determine efficiency based on that opportunity.
I love it. Where are we right now as far as like the fantasy landscape? Because I feel like there's stuff like that. There's new metrics. There's new things. How far has the industry come just to this point right now versus even just 3 or 4 years ago as far as the information that we have? And are you still able to unlock new and valuable information? I'm assuming yes, because you're coming up with new stats still.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible just looking at where we've come from 4 years ago. The level of analysis was kind of really soft, and it was just a lot of narrative-driven takes. And now we have all these numbers to quantify different things. I feel like I've invented like 30 new stats this year, but PFF stats make it really easy, especially because, until we re-unlocked Elite, all the signature stats, there wasn't a lot of competition. So, we've definitely come a long way, and there's definitely still room to grow.
Yeah, definitely be sure to check out profootballfocus.com/fantasy for, fantasy breakdowns for all types of games, from DFS to IDPs, basically anything you're looking for, because that's kind of what I do, Scott. I don't put a ton of time into strategizing, but I'll just kind of jump on PFF like a day before the draft and just take it all in. And take in all the advice, and I'm ready to go. So I know everybody kind of takes a different angle on it. They spend a month, whether you're taking a month researching or a day like I do. I think there's a little bit of something for everybody there. I'm assuming you take a little bit more time. When's your off season start? You just start diving in as soon as the season ends and looking for new stuff?
Oh man, I'm 8 hours of fantasy research a day, all day, every day, weekends included. I just love the stuff.
Love it. That's what I like to hear, and that's why you're going to give us some of your favorite players right now, exclusively on the PFF podcast. So, quarterbacks, I know you fantasy guys are just like, forget quarterbacks, don't even look at them, don't even draft them. We're going no quarterback strategy now. Is that the new thing? Everybody saying no QBs?
Pretty much. Just try and be the last quarterback and the last player in your league to take a quarterback. Like Dak Prescott's quarterback 13. I feel amazing if he's my QB1. So definitely wait at the position, load up on running backs and wide receivers early.
So that's why I'm not even going to ask you for a sleeper at quarterback because you guys don't care. So let's talk running back, receiver, and tight end. Just give me one name. Let's start with a running back. Give me one name for a guy. It could be positive or negative, just some sort of insight where either it's a name to know that you want to own or a name to know that maybe you don't want to own. Maybe he's a little overhyped. Just give me one running back to really keep an eye on.
Yeah, my guy, I think, is Kareem Hunt. I'm a stat guy, but I just loved his college tape. I thought it was so much fun to watch. And then I love the landing spot. The Chiefs traded up for him. They don't have too much invested in Spencer Ware, who ranked 6th worst in yards per carry from week 8 until the end of the season last year. As you know, Hunt graded out very well in each of his seasons. He also dominated statistically. In 2016, among all 139 qualifying draft-eligible running backs with at least 150 carries, Hunt ranked 1st in missed tackles forced per touch, 3rd in yards per route run, so he's capable as a receiver as well, and 12th in yards after contact per carry. And then over the past 13 seasons, Andy Reid's lead running back has averaged 19.5 fantasy points per game and 20.8 opportunities per game.
Man, I love it. I like when you connect the player to the scheme or to the coach. I think that's that extra added bit of value because I love Kareem Hunt as a player too. If you guys listened at all to our draft podcast leading up to the draft, we're big fans of Kareem Hunt. We went to the Senior Bowl. We saw him, you mentioned yards per route run, catch the ball in space. And it's tough for a running back to really show up at Senior Bowl practice, but he was out there catching passes in space, making guys miss. And the one word that always came to mind while watching him play was balance. And the Chiefs actually mentioned it in their post-draft press conference. His balance through contact, essentially. That's exactly how we described him, if you guys have the 2017 PFF draft guide. Balance through contact. He looked like he was in the Matrix sometimes, the way he was rolling off guys and staying on his feet and just making things happen. So I'm a huge Kareem Hunt fan. You did kind of trash Spencer Ware, though. I'm a big Spencer Ware fan, too. So I'm always torn when I look at this Kansas City backfield because I think Ware's that guy that, you mentioned the second half drop-off, which is fair, but, man, I always thought he should have been getting a shot a lot earlier in the NFL than he did. But I'm glad you mentioned Hunt as your name at running back. What about receiver? Is there a guy either overhyped, underhyped? Give me your guy to really keep an eye on at receiver.
So I like a lot of unsexy guys sometimes because, a player's only of value dependent on their ADP or price tag. And that's kind of where our edge lies, is identifying those guys people aren't really on, but maybe these should be. And I think in this instance, it's Kenny Britt, who quietly had a monster season last year. He finished as the wide receiver 27 in 15 games, which, okay, so he was like barely startable. But then you have to factor in that he had the toughest cornerback schedule and the worst quarterback situation in the league. Rams quarterbacks...
Really bad offense, that Rams offense. I mean, it was painful to watch at times, whether it was Case Keenum or Jared Goff under center. Carry on.
So Rams quarterbacks collectively averaged a 69.5 passer rating last year. But when targeting Kenny Britt, they averaged a passer rating of 96.2, which was the greatest positive difference in the league last year. He also had the highest percentage of routes come against top 25 graded cornerbacks.
Man, so now that's just another angle that you're taking. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Wide receiver versus corner, that ability that I think only PFF can really dive into is saying this wide receiver versus this cornerback and really breaking down matchups like people have never been able to do before. So that's just another angle to kind of show, hey, Kenny Britt was actually crazy productive when you look at his situation, both guys around him and the guys that he went against. So that's a great way to look at things. What about tight end? Is there give me a general tight end strategy. Is there Is it just get the top guys and then they're all the same? Where do you stand on tight ends? And then is there a name at tight end that you just either like or is overhyped?
So in traditional leagues, you start one quarterback, one tight end, two running backs, three wide receivers, and a flex, right? So I'm kind of neglecting those onesie positions. Quarterbacks, I'm waiting on. Tight ends, I'm waiting on. But a guy I like who you can get fairly late is Jack Doyle. He finished as the number 13 tight end in PPR leagues last season. He's being drafted as the tight end 13. So you're pretty much taking him at his floor. But I feel his upside is much greater than that. And especially if you don't think Eric Swoop immediately assumes Dwayne Allen's role and succeeds there. Because keep in mind, Swoop has just 4 years of experience playing organized football at any level. Over the past 3 seasons, in the 8 games Dwayne Allen did not play, Jack Doyle or Kobe Fleener averaged 17.3 PPR fantasy points per game.
Wow. And when you watch Swoop, I mean, he's a good athlete. You can see that. But you can also see that inexperience out there, too. So I could see why the Colts like him and they're going to give him a chance to develop. But that inexperience is sometimes difficult to depend on. I assume for this to hold up, you're going to be watching the Andrew Luck situation closely. On the PUP list right now for preseason. They reportedly are going to be taking him off and he'll be fine for the season. But plenty of rumblings that maybe he's a little bit more hurt than people think. I'm assuming that influences things pretty heavily if it's Andrew Luck versus maybe a Scott Tolzien starting to start the season.
I mean, absolutely. So definitely keep an eye on that. And even if he's hurt, that's a concern too, because he was one of our worst graded quarterbacks 2 seasons ago when he was playing hurt, and then last season he was one of our best.
Yeah, that Luck 2015 season, you could tell something was off, but he just was in just a different world of bad in 2015, and then last year, just an outstanding bounce back. Let's go back to the wide receiver cornerback stuff a little bit more. Something I know you've been diving into quite a bit. Would you say this is your focus? Do you have a more primary focus when it comes to fantasy? Is the wide receiver cornerback stuff your thing, your baby, the one you focus on more? And how are you using some of that work? And just give us some of the insights you've come up with through the years.
Yeah, I really think so. I just love the cornerback position. It's my favorite position in football, and I just love analyzing it for me because it's fun. But it's also kind of what I built my name around. And on top of that, I think it's one of the most exploitable edges a person can gain in DFS. And no site is touching us with cornerback data. Our wide receiver versus cornerback chart and shadow matrix that Jeff does each week.
Where can you find that, Scott?
An Edge subscription.
Is it with Edge or is that just Elite? Is that just Elite?
Well, it's Edge and Elite.
Okay, great.
$39.99, you can get an Edge subscription, which has all of this. And then Elite has everything that's built into Edge.
Love it. Got to get that cheap plug in there. Get back to it. Wide receiver, cornerback.
So, but honestly, like before I started writing for you guys, when I was just a subscriber, I felt like getting that was well worth the subscription alone. But in DFS in particular, wide receivers are priced based on their mean scoring output or the whole of the opposing defense. So we can gain a significant edge by looking at the opposing quarterback they're projected to run the majority of their routes against. Remember, the wide receiver versus cornerback chart has that, as well as fantasy production for the receiver on a per route basis and fantasy production allowed by the cornerback on a per route basis. So obviously we want to downgrade wide receivers when they're against a Chris Harris Jr. or a Patrick Peterson. But then I also want to know if these wide receivers are historically cornerback sensitive, like Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham Jr. We shouldn't be too worried about in a tough matchup. But some of the names I found were particularly surprising. I think a big edge we can get in DFS is if Brandon Cooks is going to run the majority of his routes against an especially slow cornerback. Because by my splits, where I broke it down by the 40-yard dash time of each opposing cornerback he faced on each target, he led the league in differential, where he kind of struggled against really fast cornerbacks, but he dominated especially slow cornerbacks. Allen Robinson is another guy. He's one of the worst wide receivers of the past decade against top 20 graded cornerbacks. His splits are also among the most extreme based on the height and weight of the opposing cornerbacks he faced. But believe it or not, and this is the one I found most significant, Dez Bryant has been our most cornerback-sensitive wide receiver over the past 3 seasons on a per route or per target basis. He absolutely crushes bottom 25 graded cornerbacks, but struggles against cornerbacks ranking in the top 25. This is based on fantasy point per target differential across these 2 splits. Steve, do you find any significance in these for these specific wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all pretty interesting. They're not something that I just thought. A lot of times you come up, you watch a lot of film, and you come up with a theory, and you say, here's what I think based off what I'm seeing, and then you go back and test it with numbers. I don't think I've ever come across and said, you know what, Brandon Cooks, I could just see him taking advantage of slower corners, or Dez is really taking advantage of lesser cornerbacks. There was one game I think Dez held his own against a Richard Sherman, but I think when you do look back at some of his biggest games, the height differential thing makes a lot of sense, especially with his game, the way he plays. He is, it is a lot about contested catches. He doesn't separate maybe as well as your Odell Beckhams and Antonio Browns. So a lot of that does make sense. And I like what you're saying. It's not just the matchup, it's knowing if the matchup matters. It's very easy to say, well, Dez is going up against Richard Sherman, but if you have numbers that say, hey, historically that's not going to work out for him, that's where you really have the true value. So that is some fascinating stuff that you've uncovered.
Exactly. I also have some articles coming out next week based on which wide receivers had the most difficult or easiest cornerback schedules on a per-target basis last season. For instance, Adam Thielen had the easiest quarterback schedule of the past decade last year based on average fantasy points allowed by each cornerback he was targeted on.
Well, that's why he looked so good last year.
But the other thing is though, he still came out on top over expectation. So he crushed those cornerbacks, but he did have a very easy schedule.
I love it. It does, when you do add that competition level to it, it does add, again, that little extra element of context, which I think is so important. And like you said, fantasy has come such a long way, and I think we're at a point where especially our hardcore fantasy players, the guys that are really looking for every edge, I mean, this is gold. This is absolute gold for the guys that are in the more intense leagues that need every little edge. And then for people like I play against a bunch of hometown, old buddies, right? Bunch of guys who graduated with me back in the day. Just having a little bit of this information is giving me a massive edge. I do know we have at least one PFF Elite subscriber in my league, so I'm really worried about him and how much we give away to him. But that's what I like, is that this type of information, good for all levels of fantasy players. So that's pretty great. Kind of give me, so you got some other stuff coming up. You said, give me that final plug. What are fans getting? What are we getting with PFF Edge and PFF Elite? Because we talk about it all the time here, but what people don't realize is we just said, look, fantasy, NFL information, draft information, we're not separating it anymore. It's all one. It's all in Edge, and it's all in Elite. So what's the fantasy component look like when you talk about Edge and Elite and those two products?
So if you get Edge, which is $39.99 per year, you get all of our premium articles across every platform, fantasy, DFS, draft. You also get our player grades, including snap counts. You get all of our rankings and draft tools and projections, the 2018 NFL Draft Pass. And then if you want to also projected box scores by team for PFF Elite, which is $199.99 per year, you get all of that, but you also get, which is what I'm like really kind of selfishly upset about, because I've been hogging this data and profiting off of it for a few years now, blowing up in followers. You can get so much of the stats that I frequently put out are signature stats for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. You get all of our elite stats, our DFS optimizer, which is vastly improved from last season. I thought it was great last year as well. You get DFS projections, access to our private Facebook group where I'm constantly doing Facebook live videos.
Love it. That's so if you are a hardcore DFS player, that's essentially the must, right? PFF Elite. That has all of the necessary tools to win in I mean, I actually might really dive into DFS knowing those tools that we have this year. That's the best place for it is Elite.
Oh yeah, if you want to make some money in DFS this year, get yourself an Elite subscription. I have a feeling you're going to make that money back in no time, especially if you tune into my DFS podcast, which should premiere in a few weeks.
Love it. That's what it's all about. We're just trying to give the lay of the land, what's happening at PFF, and give everybody a little insight on the fantasy side of the company. Those guys are doing great work over there. Be sure to check it out at profootballfocus.com/fantasy. And of course, both subscriptions, profootballfocus.com/subscriptions. Check out both Edge and Elite. Scott, thanks a lot for joining us today, and hope to have you back soon to give us a little bit more fantasy insight.
I'd love it. Thank you so much, Steve.
And that'll do it for today's PFF podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed a little sneak peek at our fantasy team. Special thanks to Jeff Ratcliffe and Scott Barrett for joining the show today. Honestly, insight that you simply can't find anywhere else because it's all powered by the PFF data. The same data that you could find as part of PFF Edge and PFF Elite. And we're still giving away a free PFF Elite. All you have to do, leave a 5-star review on the podcast, leave your Twitter handle or an email address, a way that we can get in touch with you, and we're going to give away one every week. Okay, so 5-star review, and you have a shot at our $200 PFF Elite product. If you don't want to do that, you can get a chance to win a free PFF Edge. And this isn't even a game. This is just going to DraftKings or FanDuel through our website, profootballfocus.com/FanDuel17 or profootballfocus.com/DraftKings17. So you go there, you make your first deposit in FanDuel or DraftKings, $10 deposit, and you'll get a free PFF Edge. And, you know, Edge is the way you're going to make some money on FanDuel and DraftKings. So it all works out well. So we have plenty of opportunities for you guys to pick up PFF Edge, to pick up Elite. And then don't forget, mentioned at the top of the show, my new favorite way to play fantasy football. It's Draft in the App Store or playdraft.com. Use the promo code PFF and you'll get a free $3 game to kick things off. So a lot of fun things happening right now. We hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. We'll be here all month with some preseason analysis and some preseason picks and predictions. So until next time, everybody have a good week.